Hello, welcome, Cohort 8. Thank you all for sharing your hellos in the first minutes. So, for the rest of this meeting, briefly we'll cover the meeting structure for this interval of activity and a little bit about our niche and to whatever extent you'll come to explore it and modify it as well. And then we'll kind of discuss 1 foot in chapter 1, 1 foot in any other general questions, because that's kind of where chapter 1 and 10 are at. They're like bookends, they kind of lead in and lead out. So it is a good approach chapter, as behooves a chapter 1. So this cohort 8 live meeting is our landing page. If you want to bookmark that one, it's a good one. And as briefly mentioned, Cohort 7 will be active at the same time weekly, going through the second half of the book. So you're welcome to join. You're welcome to rewatch videos from any cohort. You're welcome to join live at the same time slot weekly, at which time alternating weeks it'll be from the second half of the book. Like next week at this time will be people saying hello in cohort 7 slash whoever is there and going over chapter 6. And then when we're on chapter 2, they'll be on chapter 7 and so on. And the day of the meeting, a recording is posted. So that's kind of like the synchronous element and the rhythm of 2 weeks per chapter, um, with lots of edges coming in and out. So to briefly go over this CODA document, um, at any time, anyone can write a question in the Zoom chat or raise your hand in Zoom. So just anything that you want to clarify or just go for it. And this document has like open comment access. And then also you can request edit access if for some reason like your email just hasn't been added to edit the to add directly. So um top page, you can right click and download the PDF of the textbook, and it's just a welcome page. Directory has some pages linked. Um Onboarding, this is like some more information about onboarding to the Institute overall. There's a lot of other projects and activities outside of the textbook group. So check it out. And also learning practices. Like we come from many different backgrounds. We have many different time availabilities, many different affordances are accessible to us. We have many different preferences for where we go and so on. So adding different activities that is like, okay, when we time box and card in to be learning and applying active inference, what is that really looking like? And what's a healthy and a productive blend for us? And some of those are solitary, some of those are in your own knowledge management environment, some of those might be in this open source knowledge environment or in another repository somewhere. Um, Contribute to the textbook group. Here, again, there's more ways to do than not to do with contributing. So if you feel like, yeah, I'd love to improve the synchronous or the asynchronous components of this group, or there's other places to contribute outside of textbook group too. So that journey might take you there, but it could be anything from playing at some point like a live role in the meetings. For example, the later time slot is going to be facilitated by Andrew Pashea, who has joined the textbook group also many times and will pitch fastballs also and facilitate those discussions. Um, Taking notes and scribing, developing different code examples, asking questions. This is going to be like a totally vital element. Like a lot of times it can feel like what we don't understand is, our limitation or something, but actually when we externalize that question, we can make a lot of interesting learnings and progress together. So check out different ways to contribute if that is exciting. The meetings page has the past completed cohorts and the 2 ongoing cohorts. So that's kind of like the like organizational about the textbook group. And you can fold pages in Coda like that. And also you can make it light or dark if it looks different on your screen, but I'm using the dark version. All right. Then there's 2 other main sections. There's the textbook, and then there's kind of our discourse. So first, the textbook itself. We have the pages in a table, and you can download these tables, or but these it may become relevant. And also, Coda is really cool. You can make your own Coda, or you can play around. But by putting at, you can tag any page or person or even row. So, like at page 1, a mouse over shows that, or at surprise is going to be a link to the active inference ontology, or different other places where it's been mentioned. Thank you for posting, Nick. Awesome. So that's the page by page. And also you can click on someone's token icon and you'll jump to their location in Coda. So if you click on the 4D, you'll jump to where I am. So it's just page by page. Okay. Then we get to the chapters. So there's 10 chapters and 3 appendices. There's a detailed table of contents. Just skimming and just familiarizing, and the many coats of paint will just come up again and again with just like kind of taking a deep breath and just reading it, and just, there's stuff that's erroneous that we've discovered. There's stuff that is ambiguous or over under precise, or just there's so many different readings, but just sticking with it on a first read and staying in the game, you'll be reducing your uncertainty. Then there's the sections here. So this is kind of where we go when we're going to have like the chapter 1 discussion. And there's a few main, each of these chapter pages have a few main components. First, there's a kind of like a 20-minute-ish overview that Ollie and I did over several days. These are they're fun. And we just sort of contextualize like what is this chapter doing in the context of the book, and just what are the sections of the chapter, basically. Then there's these questions that are all part of this underlying questions table, which we're going to get back to. But you can upvote questions that you think are interesting, and we'll kind of always prioritize or front load written questions that people have added in. And then live questions that people have that will enter into rows. And then, failing that, we kind of just return to highly interesting questions. And then this canvas has some questions are answerable, debatable. Others are more just discursive. So you can always check out that canvas and read and add more. No need to delete anything per se, but add more. And so it goes. So that's like the questions section of each page. And then at the bottom, there's sometimes short, sometimes vast, a little bit more unstructured. So usually when we're having a discussion, if it's like kind of outside of the realm of a question per se, sometimes we're just like, or just it's like a question, but we just are doing it out in the open. It's not a fully formed question yet. We will put it there. So it's like everything is in a state of open source and contributive enjoyment. And does active inference currently allow for learning a model structure? It's like it does, but that's not reflected here. But if you see that and you go, yeah, and I'm curious about this, then, add it there. Or you can select text and add a comment, or you could add a link that's relevant. And so everything is just if you see some discrepancy between like what you'd want that page to be and what it is in your observation, you can change your mind or you can change the page, basically, as we will come to see. So that's how the chapters are. Overview video, questions and discourse for everybody's addition and reading, and then some more scattered topics over the years that people have discussed. So that's the chapters. Then there's figures. So here it's like screenshots and just the figure names. And this comes up all the time because we'll tag like at figure 1.1. And then you can get a mouse over and you can see these figures. And these are also helpful just to see and to kind of be inspired technically or to make some artistic rendering of or all this. The equations section. So here's screenshots similarly of the taggable equations. Like you can just say like equation 2.1. Then for those who want to explore a little bit of LaTeX and using AI and so on, here's LaTeX re-renderings of the equations. And in this LaTeX column is the plain text LaTeX. So if you want to, you can utilize those. And then using just the simple Coda generative AI from the LaTeX, here's like explanation, summary code, where is it important, what are the variables. Now, these are just sort of a little bit like a low context generation about what are some related, but they're conversation starters for sure. To just go from the LaTeX of Bayes equation, these are some, and then do you have it, would you phrase one differently? Would you add one? Would you remove one? It's not relevant. Like that's already you're in the sort of metacognitive and learning and relevance realization process by exploring it that way, whatever your level of math familiarity is. Okay, thank you, Marvin. I'll return to that. Boxes and tables, these are just similar for the equations and figures. They're just for the boxes and the tables. So that's just this section is just the kind of parsing of the textbook itself. I'm just going to return briefly to that important piece I didn't mention. So this is like when everybody registered, they gave a self-assessed 0 to 100 on 4 questions, which is how familiar are you with active inference? And then also how familiar are you with computer science, biology, and math, which are kind of like 3 of the disciplinary areas that these conversations are related to. So the x-axis is familiarity with active inference. So for example, the person who put 100, let's just say, um, they also rated themselves as 78 or whatever in biology and 100 in math. So what this is showing, uh, there's a few interesting patterns here. First interesting pattern is there's a sharp psychological drop off of people at 80. Very few people rate themselves as familiar with active inference above 80. Again, this is all self-assessed. So you could even, you know, smile and chuckle at some of these. But and then it doesn't show the density, but there's a strong at 50, like maximal uncertainty. And then like other than that, what this shows is we run the self-assessed and probably externally assessed gamut from those with little familiarity with math, computer science, and biology and neuroscience to very, very high expertise in those areas. So that's just kind of the situation, and the fun is we can't necessarily presuppose that any given technique or topic is going to be familiar to others. Like just we're living in different places in the world and we have different educational backgrounds and all of that. But this kind of just in one visualization shows that a little bit with a like almost complete painting of how familiar we are with these different topics. Okay. And then just this last main section, discourse. So here's a lot of the things that people have added over the years. So again, questions are a key aspect. And you can add questions by going to the bottom of some subsection. Like here, we're in chapter one, and you just can go to the bottom. It can make a button too to add it, and then just hitting enter there. And then you're adding a question. And that'll show up in the chapter one filtered view. So or there's so there's ways to add questions. Um, Applying active inference. This one is going to come up again and again. I mean, learning and applying active inference is kind of the bigger picture. That's what we do at the Institute. So if that is your interest, um, you also may want to check out like there's many links, and we can return to this more specifically. We're not going to jump in at this minute to just where are all the applications hosted and all that, but they're out there, and there's more to make. Math Learning Group is kind of like a special subgroup that has done different things over the seasons. Last cohort activity, Dr. Octopus was leading like a group, and so there's some sessions with Octopus, and he did a lot of other work too. There's math learning resources, so these are some background information, but like everyone's going to be in a different place, and this is going to trickle out into learning like probability and stochastic systems, dynamical systems, linear algebra, all these different topics that are explored a little bit in the appendix. They're just kind of noted. And also nowadays, using chat-based generative AI is an excellent way to learn and go back to those foundations. Also, the SPM textbook is a great place to go for understanding Friston et al.'s trajectory into active inference. Notation we can return to again later with equations and stuff. There's a lot there. Math learning questions. These are kind of like meta questions about math learning. Math overviews. Some people have written and contributed just to more just to breakdowns of the chapters about certain math things. So, but again, this just shows like there's people who want to for whom it will be the first time seeing a Bayesian equation, or for whom linear regression or matrix multiplication may be unfamiliar. And then also there are those who want to really explore the analytical rigor and understand Bayesian mechanics and all these other topics at a really advanced level. And you're either if you leave a trace, you're either going to be contributing to important educational materials that will help others immensely, and or contributing to frontier research. So go for it. Projects. This is a table where people can like list kind of concepts for projects. Some of these are actually did very much continue on. More broadly, the activities page, activities.activeinference.institute, will link you to like ongoing projects at the Institute, other things that are hosted here, and then other projects that are happening in the ecosystem. So if you want to just get involved in projects that have little to do with the textbook, there's a lot of ways that you can find out about that and propose your own. And then here is just like things that people have ideas people have brought up related to the textbook group itself. Code, we'll return to it, but yeah, SPM textbook, that's statistical parametric mapping. So important little
Αγόρι
historical
μου,
trivium
τι
that
γίνεται, πήρες
okay,
το καπελάκι, ε?
um the reason why Carl Friston is the most cited neuroscientist, even sort of outside slash prior to the free energy principle and active inference development thrust of the last like 19-ish years, is this statistical toolbox for processing neuroimaging data like fMRI and EEG. So the textbook and the documentation, the textbook's last hardcover publication was 2007. And then since then, there's documentation online. And there's also like a recent 2025 release of the software package. It's in MATLAB. Some of the methods are written in it. We may or may not explore those. This is really, really good for showing in a well-worked and well-studied system of interest. Like, how do you go from the data that comes off of the fMRI machine on through the kinds of smoothing and statistical assessments that lead to your ability to do like dynamic causal modeling and counterfactuals on Bayes graphs and understanding and modeling cognitive behavioral systems. So it's kind of the precursor to active inference, but it also really helps ground it in experimental paradigms. Then Todd, you're right. In terms of first interval's trajectory into active inference, um, I mean in terms of their historical development of studying perception and action systems empirically, leading into the generalizations that are seen in active inference and free energy principle, but also in terms of one of us's individual learning trajectories, because the SPM documentation textbook is a really good, if dense, review of parametric, Bayesian, and non-parametric statistics in a specific empirical paradigm. So that can really help ground a lot of the discussions of like statistics and probability that come up. Code, here's a table that links to another document, but here's several dozen in different computer languages, and there's other ones that aren't added. But I mean, this is again like a classic collaborative annotation task. It's like adding these different examples, building them in different languages. So especially in MATLAB, Python, and Julia, but there's also some other stuff in Go and some other things we can discuss. Um, Ideas and insights, if it's not a question, but somebody just wants to like be like, yeah, wow, that was kind of like a really insightful conclusion of this part of the book, or here's what this made me realize. Resources here is a great place to post resources. Ali created this table with a nice sorting from less technical to more technical. So this is another learning journey to explore. Videos, of course, you can check our channel. I think earlier somebody mentioned Machine Learning Street Talk, and there's other channels that variously make relevant material. Um, and but also like throughout the discourse, there's a lot of resources posted. Future textbook groups, there's a anonymous feedback form. There's also like many other many discussions about um ranging from hopeful and aspirational to frustrated about how do we learn and apply active inference in this time from different backgrounds and with the tools that we have. So if that's an interesting question to you, there's a lot of food for thought here. Errata has several identified like typos or small errors. Some of them have been like subtly updated in kind of subversions in the at the MIT Press website. Others we have sent and they may be included like just in a future kind of typo fixing edit of the textbook. So that's just some random stuff. And then last section, just active tables. Again, we'll dig more into these more topically as they come up. But there's the active inference ontology. This is kind of like our language agnostic dialect. It's that we use to interface between different natural languages and some of the technical and analytical formalisms that are used in active inference. There's this is from an earlier literature meta-analysis project that some people may want to pick back up. Just several hundred papers. You could also just do literature searches and things like that. And then also there's the um, table of several hundred videos that have been produced from different series. So scanning through the papers and the titles of guest streams, even without viewing the videos, can help you just get a good first pass on what the discourse is up to, what are some key topics, and you could search for, not that the title will find everything, but you may just search, oh, organizations or something like that, and then you might find some relevant title. but then also those words, and there's the journal for searching more densely. So that's kind of our um space. Asynchronous meetings, of course, are awesome and fun, and we get to see each other and have emergent discussion and everything. And also, there's the time between the meetings when we engage in the learning practices. You can add your information if you're okay with it being public, because it is. You can add information to this table. You can message and connect with people in the Zoom chat. But in terms of the rhythm, and just to kind of close this section, we basically meet at these times in this link where we are right now, and we try to keep one foot connected to the focal topic, or it's sort of our strange attractor. So, starting with a quote or kind of stapling it to a concept that's mentioned in the text on a specific page is a great way to begin. General, lifelong, floating uncertainties and wonderings also can be welcome. Um, it helps us have a convergence and relevant focus to just be like, okay, we're in chapter two, where's a quote, and then connect that. And there's no end to the amount of pre-play you can do with preparing extensive questions and so on. So, of course, we can't and won't linearly fit every single uncertainty and everything we have into these 1 hour meetings. But between people learning and publishing on their own blogs and repos and linking in week by week and reviewing what questions people have thoughtfully prepared and bring to the table, like it seems far away in one sense to look at May 2025, but we can also learn a ton over these coming months. So, any like logistical or niche questions? Otherwise, we will go to chapter one and just like pick up with any page or quote or question that anyone has.
Could you just give me an overview of the mission of the institute that you are leading?
Yeah, to make active inference accessible and applicable.
And you're
And
just and you're just a nonprofit doing that, or what's your
we're
connection to other organizations?
we're a standalone volunteer nonprofit. We have relationships with some other partners,
Do you have any connections to the Santa Fe Institute?
not organizationally,
Okay.
but if they want to, they can send emails. And I know that they're exploring that, and there's diffusion of peoples and ideas, which is all awesome. But and
Yeah.
whatever's streamlined and useful, let's see what happens.
Okay.
Um,
Sorry, I have a very concrete question. Like how will this work moving forward? Between meetings, we all each read like the chapter and prepare as much as we want. And then do we step through the chapter during the meeting, or like how will it look structurally,
yeah,
these meetings?
good question. Like you could review previous recordings, but in the end, it's like who's there in the moment, and then there's going to be some blend between someone who's like, um, you know, this is what my dissertation research is about, and here's how I prepared these few things, and I see these three paths, but I'm not sure what, it's like someone might have prepared a ton. Other people will just be like, okay, I did look at it, or I didn't look at a chapter, but I'm just here to see what's up. And then usually when it's just outside of this onboarding type session, it's basically as we'll go now. It's like I'll open up, okay, we're on chapter one. We can did anyone add a written question? Like, is there any question that somebody here added that's likely going to be down on the bottom that we can look at? Or is there some other question that somebody here wants to look at, regardless of whether it was written prior? Or is there some specific quote or figure or equation? So it's like, for who's here, is there a question or a section of the book that is exciting for them that they want to go into? And then if again totally failing that, we can just pick a random question that either does or doesn't have discourse, or just like, okay, chance favors the prepared mind. Like, what does this mean to us in the context of active inference? Um, okay, Nick, is each chapter spread out over the 2 live meetings? Yeah, each chapter occurs for 2 weeks, but again, it's like next week it'll be in 7 or however many 8 hours later. So if you want to join then and discuss chapter 1 again, great. If you want to join next week at 15 UTC, it'll be discussing chapter 6. That would also be welcome. But then in 2 weeks, it'll be at this time with chapter 2. Sylvia, I can't add a question to the table. Does it require edit access? Yeah, it does require edit access. Just request access and I'll add it when I'm just logged in differently. But this new row button at the bottom, if you have edit access, you can just add a new row and just new question. But yeah,
How do
just
we
in
how do we access that panel when we're not in a Zoom meeting? Where's the link for this?
um so I'm just gonna put this is the cohort 8. Like this page is the one I'm looking at now. You can open that in your browser anytime. And
Okay.
then you'll request edit access if you don't have it. But everybody has comment access, even like when they're not logged in. And then from there, you just like chapter 1. That's a hyperlink to go to this chapter 1 page. Or you can navigate in the sidebar.
Okay.
And then the discourse is in this panel. And if just add if you think it's cool. But yeah, well, just so over the next week or two, people will get their footings, request edit access, and I'll provide it. And then yeah, like everyone reading this will have questions. The questions will run the gamut from like existential, philosophical to just like syntactic and semantic. Like, what does surprise mean here? And all of those spectrum of questions are really useful. And identifying your uncertainty and then pursuing it from there is a huge way to learn. And the more specific that uncertainty comes to be, like, how did they get from equation this to that? Or why is this arrow in this figure like that? Or does it have to be? Then you'll come to some satisfaction, and then you'll see exactly how you're learning and reducing your uncertainty through action. Whereas, not writing it down or closing the book, then you're not going to reduce that uncertainty. You're just going to not pay attention to it. But yeah, what's a related to chapter 1 or just in overview? What are things people are like thinking about or wondering?
I could have a go at a question. Um, yeah, on page 9, in the first bullet point on page 9, um, it's talking about action and perception, but then it's also saying learning is yet another way to minimize free energy. However, it is not fundamentally different from perception. It simply operates at a slower time scale. So I guess my question, I have like no neuroscience biology background. Like, is there kind of an obvious sort of intuition or something differentiating learning with perception and why they operate on different timescales?
I'd like to build on that question. Somebody gave me an interesting definition of persuasion, where they claimed persuasion is just a different form of learning.
Yeah, belief updating. And if someone says, well, carbon has a mass of 12 units, and somebody's like, they don't know, they have a broad prior belief, and then that updates it, or whether they're being persuaded that it's 12, like that's some kind of contextual. What I could add more thought, or what does anyone think about how learning and perception are related?
I could say, for me, Andres, for me, the key insight of active inference is that when an organism relates with the environment, there's this freedom between two options that you can update the environment or you can update your beliefs, whichever is easier. And so free energy minimization determines which is going to be easier. But so perception would be updating your beliefs in the way that learning is updating your beliefs. It's just that perception is maybe one way to think about it is maybe the time scale is different, but another way is just the apparatus is different. But but they're both about updating beliefs as opposed to updating the environment.
Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, like let's just say a ball is moving across our visual fields. We could think of it as perception of the ball moving across the field, or we could think about it as learning and belief updating of the ball moving across the field. And so learning is sometimes used to refer to slower updating processes in a neural network, like artificial neural network. Perception might refer to just the single pass forward inference, whereas learning would be more about the weight updating. And then even slower kinds of like structural learning could happen when the structure of the graph is changing. But again, like a ball moving, even that is more generically described as belief updating. And then whether we associate that with the phenomenology of perception and like that it entails a perceiver and all of that, or whether we think of that as doing learning on the position of the ball. But then we might say like, well, learning would be something that's more generic or slower time scale than perception. Like if we're learning the gravitational constant, we say, well, we perceived a bunch of balls flying across the visual field, and then we did learning on some variable like what is the gravitational constant. But considered from those two sides of the coin, the two ways to reduce free energy, change the mind, which could be change perceptual like beliefs or change more cognitive beliefs, which is associated more with learning, but they're all part of the belief updating structure, as opposed to reducing free energy through action. But both, yeah.
I just want to build on and ask a question about discontinuous learning. Think of that in terms of paradigm shifts or phase transitions in your belief system. There become moments where, you have maybe a dramatic insight, aha, and it completely turns your mind in a new direction. So that's a different kind of learning than just sort of this continuous ball in the air. I'm more interested in the paradigm shift kind of learning. Is when you watch a movie, for example, there is learning that you get in every scene about a character, about what's really going on. But every now and then you get a real turn in the movie, a real pivot in the movie where it shifts your mind in a totally new direction. And it's the phase transitions that really, I think, change the search function for the engine, I guess, because it now looks a little bit more like a random walk or something.
Yeah. I mean, whether that is belief updating in a discrete belief space, which is discontinuous, whether it's an extremely rapid continuous update that when viewed out looks like a step function, whether it's structured learning. There's a lot of ways to nuance that and even to connect it to paradigm shifting and discontinuous change like that. Andreas and then Montin.
Yeah, so the alternative to perception learning would be like to destroy the ball or hide the ball or stop the motion of the ball or ignore the ball. Like there's all these other ways that would be neither perception nor learning. I just want to add that.
Yes. What I heard about is this conceptual changes, and I was thinking about what is the exact difference between an insight and recognition, also just phenomenologically wise. And I was really thinking about well, this difference is related on what level in the hierarchy this belief is changing. So very deep beliefs up in the hierarchy, those are more considered paradigm shifts. And those lower in the hierarchy, if those beliefs are getting in there, those are just recognitions and just becoming aware of the perceptual environment. And I was thinking about how you guys reflect on this.
Yeah, because the if you go to the lower levels, I mean, an echo chamber in social media is a kind of paradigm, but it just operates at a totally different speed than paradigm shifts in science.
But if you go to echo chamber, you actually have if I'm correct, the higher level beliefs stay constant for there is just only reinforcement. So
Well,
there's no insight transfer on higher levels.
Well, if you go back to Thomas Kuhn's definition of what a paradigm is, it defines the questions you're allowed to ask under that particular paradigm. And one of the points he makes about paradigms is there's no last paradigm. It's like a fractal. It's all the way down. It's Russian dolls. You never actually get to the end of the paradigms, and you isolate yourself. This is a new theory in AI, into AI neighborhoods, depending on the paradigm you're operating with, and that's got very different consequences in terms of like the world will continue to separate into different belief systems regardless of where AI goes. It will be a continuous part of how intelligence evolves.
Okay, well, it seems that paradigm shifts for me is different understanding, but perhaps resolvement will come later.
Just say I've come to the same conclusion myself, particularly relating to religious events. They are spiritual shifts, major changes in perception. They are the same thing as messing with a belief at a particularly deep level of one's predictive. You can't help. You'd have to rewrite the whole story all the way up, and
right?
Then you experience everything very different.
And I've had a few of those religious experiences, which is why the question is kind of fundamental to me. I've had a total looking in a totally new direction than I was looking before as a result of like a single very brief experience. It's a phase transition from water to ice, basically. It's a radically different shaping of perceptions.
Yeah, and what this model does is it gives us a very clear way in which I would argue no religion yet has in terms of how to bring that about, how to trigger it.
Well, true, but I'm back to the point is like there is no such thing as the perfect paradigm. I mean, even Kuhn believed that the old generation of scientists had to die off before you could actually get to a new paradigm because it was too hard to change it at the very end. It's like the religious transition that St. Augustine went through, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So, Ali, and then Andreas, and anyone else with their hand raised. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out Michael Levin's recent article, Self-Improvising Memory, about how learning or actually memory formation occurs even in very basic complex agents such as molecular, biological, complex systems. So basically, the point here is that when an agent learns about its environment, it's not so much about the fidelity or the exact modeling of its environment, but more the salient parameters of the environment in which it tries to preserve. So the higher it goes in its hierarchical structure of its memory formation, the more it needs to keep those salient parameters, or as John Vervaeke would call, the more it needs to realize to do the relevance realization. That's a term it uses. So basically, the thing about perception and learning and why they are closely interrelated, I think, depends in part on this process of memory formation. I mean, the higher, the higher we go up onto on the ladder of this hierarchical generative modeling of the environment, the more it needs to retain the relevant and salient parameters of the environment. So on the very basic levels, some of the perceived elements would not be needed for long-term perseverance of that agent through the environment. But as we know, the longer the agent wants to persevere through the environment, the more it needs to attend to those salient and relevant parameters. And one other thing I wanted to point out relating to this interconnection between perception and action, Alan Bartos has a famous quote relating these two parameters as saying, which I think is beautiful. He says, perception is simulated action, which we'll come to in chapter 2, why it can be also applied for active inference. So, yeah, we can look at perception and action in a dual form from two complementary viewpoints, but at the end of the day, they both somehow provide the same formal structure, looking whether we look at the environment or from the environment to from the agent to the environment, or from the environment to the agent.
When you say perception is simulated action, isn't that imagination?
Not exactly. You see, well, it comes to it plays on the elements of ecological psychology. You see, and the concept of affordances from the ecological psychology. But of course, affordances are used in a very different sense in active inference. But in brief, when an agent sees an affordance, an opportunity to act upon, it doesn't perceive that object or that element of the environment just as a thing, but it sees it sees the element as an opportunity to and how the agent can act upon that opportunity, right?
How is that different from imagination, though?
Well, I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly, but to my mind, when we talk about imagination, we don't necessarily use this kind of affordance thinking. We don't map affordances onto the object of the environment. As a very simple example, when we
If I see a gun in a movie in a drawer, it's an old Hollywood thing, is like, somewhere later in the movie the gun's going to get used, right? So it's
yeah,
the affordance of the gun is like the imagination starts looking ahead, is like, how is that gun going to be used in the story, in the narrative, right?
yeah, sure. So
So it may be just semantics, imagination, and and what I'm actually poking at is there a real difference between imagination or just making predictions about what I could do, under inference theory? That's all.
precisely, you see, imagination plays a very significant role in shaping the prediction and even our generative model of the world. But you see, as a very simple example, when we look at coffee mug, whether we want to, I don't know, hold on to that coffee mug from the rim, or I don't know, hold it in. I mean, in another way, those two different perceptions would provide those two different ways of acting upon that coffee mug would provide two different perceptions of that same object. That's what I was.
It's a random thought, but I'm building on what you're saying. I'm not criticizing it. It makes me think of like that's how topology works in mathematics. What are the and so there's a topological component of perception, I suspect.
That will also return. Also, just a general comment, like crashing English words or other natural words into each other, it's like continent scale discussion. How is imagination related to surprise? Or, how is it's just like they have it's such a broad scope that it's like it's absurd. So it's great. And it's like, but it's the most symbolized coarse-grained token that we can share and reference. So it's just like pointing, it's like, yeah, the North Pole is that way. And so that is like just a doorway. And then there's the whole generative modeling process. And then when you get down to it, you have analytical expressions and specific structured models that describe like, well, here's how I'm thinking about imagination in this setting. This is the cognitive phenomena that I'm associating with imagination. And that is,
can I bring it back to something a little more data specific then? Because I agree with you. When you take the simple words, you get the big ideas. When you take the big words, you get the little ideas. I think that's the way I think of words. But are you familiar with the remembrance bump or the memory bump? It's the point that memories in human lifespan are not evenly distributed, but they're actually concentrated between the years of 15 and 25 or 30. And the reason for that is because that's when you are going through the phase transition of the concept of self that you had, that your parents imposed on you up until you became a teenager. And then you're reinventing yourself, your adult sense of self, and separating from the childhood sense of self. So it speaks to a phase transition in a self-referential way to the concept of self, not just the environment. And I'm curious about, as you know, because I've got teenage grandkids, as they're going through this biological process of basically creating their adult sense of self and separating from the parents' idea of who they should be. And there's a lot of data behind that and so on. You can use it to build predictive models, actually, of like that's why Hollywood does remakes of movies and stuff like that. Take the same story and update it with a new generation. And stuff like that. So when you introduce the self-referential component to the concept of self, not just the environment, I'm going to be curious to see how active inference deals with that self-referential component.
Yeah, keep sketching it out and seeing what simpler generative model motifs you can bring in, and you'll be well on the way towards that. Marvin and then Andreas with the hands raised, and then anyone else, and then that will be it.
I wanted to. I've raised my hand.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Going back to the hierarchy, for me, I'm interested in looking at that through the middle. And I think what I'd like to do with active inference is to say, hey, hierarchy going up, there could be a hierarchy going down. But I think there's an essential gap between the two minds, let's say the answering mind. So thinking of an environment, saying, oh, well, what is the unconscious that's presenting this and is all these answers? And then what is this mind that doesn't know but is able to ask questions and engage and investigate? And so those would be like somewhere in the middle of the hierarchy. And that way you can go further out into the world, you can go off into abstractions, but you don't have to worry about them so much because the main focus is on how these two very different ways of looking at things in terms of what we know and what we don't know, how they match up. That's what I'm interested to.
Okay, thank you. Marvin, and then any final raised hands, then that will be it.
Okay. Quite basic. I'm curious, maybe just I know it might be a deep topic, but just basically, like what's the relation, or does active inference imply the predictive processing theory of the mind or predictive coding? Because what I really liked in the preface, it says we're not simply trying to make sense of our sensations, we are actively creating our sensorium. So to me, that sounded a lot like predictive processing or generative, whatever you want to call it. So is predictive processing just a derivation of active inference or an implication, or is it
Yeah,
in parallel? Yeah.
great question. I know that there's some question in one of the chapters, but active predictive processing. So considering the active prior meeting the observation, like on the retina, and including the capacity for the retina to move, active predictive processing gets you it is active inference. They basically are more isomorphic than not. In live stream 43, Maria does an awesome historical review, like going back several thousand years to this concept of like the active predictive elements. Um, they're more similar than not. If you're talking about descending predictions, ascending sensory information, and then the descending predictions not just being, well, what will I see, but what will I do? You basically have the scheme for active inference. And then there's some slight differences just like more like historically slash culturally with like, well, predictive processing is often discussed in terms of a hierarchical model, but active inference models, they don't have to be hierarchical models. They could just be single layer. But predictive processing arising from like the visual mammalian neuroscience. So then that's why that architecture became kind of generalized from visual perception versus just being in its most generic system independent form.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Martin, then that will be it.
Yes, it's a small question. I think a small question to state, but I think a very interesting question to think about, and that is the relation between of how to view willpower through the lens of active inference. And my only gut feeling is that it has, if there is a certain way to look at it, interpret it, it would be in how you are able to resist prediction error, like how much you are able to have like this tension in the model of expected things and not the expected prediction perception. I mean, but that's a very interesting question. I'd like to think about.
Cool. Yeah. And just the predictive processing, predictive coding, Bayesian brain, that they again they all are closer than not. But there's a few specific resources if you really want to split the hair. Okay, last comment, Andrews, and then that'll it.
Yeah, so on the will, I think that's very much where I'm headed is I believe there's three minds. There's one that has these answers, there's one that has these questions, one that investigates. And so it's the investigating mind that kind of pairs them up and sees, oh, do I want to lean on perception, updating beliefs, or do I want to lean on action, updating the environment? If now you could say it's just the free energy principle, but the theory maybe allows for something more, that there's a third mind that kind of actively applies that to equate those two, but also to decide I'm going to use one, I'm going to lean this way, I'm going to lean that way. So then that would be very willful. That's what I'm interested to model.
The
Cool.
Schopenhauer's book, the world is will and representation, or the world is will and idea, is probably an interesting mapping onto active inference theory.
Cool. Thank you all. Hopefully this is a little taste of linear conversation, and like I can see that you all have many avenues this makes you explore. And I really encourage you to write them out so that they're simultaneous and then contribute them into our niche where they're much more digestible than trying to linearly convey these ideas. If you have them preloaded and you're thinking about it and you're wondering about like, do that chain of thought, and then we'll have something to really digest deliberately over hours and something that people can add to, rather than just follow up on. So hence the sort of live, but mainly, I mean, we're, next several hundred hours.
How do we do that again? Remind me just really quickly.
The whole everything we looked at with a document is editable. So you can ask and add questions like by adding a row that was shown. But you can add to the discourses, the canvas that was next to the question on the row.
Okay.
Or you can just, write it on your own blog or make a GitHub repo and share that link. If you don't see the right nook or cranny in our shared niche, just write it and then link it in.
Okay.
So, all right. Thank you. See you all in 1 or 2 weeks. All right. Bye.